We're going to deal with Walt Whitman, who's one of the great American transcendentalists, and in particular, Leaves of Grass, which he published numerous times, probably nine editions, depending upon how you count them. The original one was 30 pages. The final one was over 400 pages. So let's see what's going on here with Walt Whitman. Here we have a picture showing someone who was not Walt Whitman, but it was someone that he gravitated toward. It was an image of what was felt to be at the time. This is again 1855, the spirit of America. So you look at this person, you see a hat at a jaunty angle. There's some slacks and a shirt and a well trimmed beard, and the person's obviously white, and so it goes. So let's see. Walt Whitman, shown here on the right, obviously a little different than the picture we just looked at, was an American poet, essayist, and journalist, and he also wrote two novels. But he's considered to be one of the most influential poets in American literature and even in world literature. He incorporated both transcendentalism and realism in his writings and is often called the father of free verse. His work was very controversial in his time, particularly his initial 1855 poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, which was described by some as obscene for its overt sensuality. He was born in Huntington on Long Island, lived in Brooklyn as a child, and through much of his career. At age 11, he left formal schooling to go to work, and he worked as a journalist, a teacher, and a government clerk at various times, multiple thereof. His major poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, first published in 1855, was financed with his own money and became well known. The work was an attempt to reach out to the common person with an American epic, and Whitman continued expanding and revising Leaves of Grass until his death in 1892. During the American Civil War, he went to Washington, D.C., and worked in hospitals caring for the wounded. And his poetry often focused on both loss and healing. On the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, whom Whitman greatly admired, he authored a number of poems, including O Captain, My Captain, and When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed, and he gave a series of lectures on Lincoln. He suffered a stroke toward the end of his life, moved to Camden, New Jersey, and died there at age 72. Now, his influence on poetry remains very strong. Art historian Mary Berenson wrote, "You cannot really understand America without Walt Whitman, without Leaves of Grass. He has expressed that civilization, up to date, as he would say, and no student of philosophy of history can do without him." Ezra Pound, the modernist poet, called Whitman's America's poet. He is America. And according to the Poetry Foundation, he is America's world poet, a latter-day successor to Homer, Virgil, Dante, and Shakespeare. The Leaves of Grass was a poetry collection. It was first published and rewritten and so forth. But the result was that there are vastly different editions over 4 decades. The first edition was a small book of 12 poems. The last was a compilation of over 400. The collection of loosely connected poems represents the celebration of his philosophy of life and humanity and praises nature and the individual human's role in it. But rather than focusing on religious or spiritual matters, Leaves of Grass focuses primarily on the body and the material world. Its poems do not rhyme or follow standard rules for meter and line length. So Leaves of Grass is regarded by many scholars as a completely do-it-yourself project. Whitman chose his idealized self as the subject of the book, created the style in which it was written, and worked hard and intelligently to perfect the style over a period of 6 and 7 years, and creating the personality of the proletarian bard, the supposed writer of the poems. It's also notable for its discussion of delight in sensual pleasures during a time when such candid displays were considered immoral. The book was highly controversial during its time for its explicit sexual imagery. Whitman was subject to derision by many contemporary critics. Over time, however, the collection has infiltrated popular culture, become recognized as one of the central works of American poetry. Among the works in this collection are Song of Myself, I Sing the Body Electric, Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, and later editions would include Whitman's elegy to the assassinated President Abraham Lincoln, When Lilacs Last in the Doorway Bloomed. So the first edition, 1855, 95 pages. He registered the title Leaves of Grass with the clerk at the United States District Court in the Southern District of New Jersey, got a copyright. The title is a pun, as grass was a term given by publishers to work of minor value, and leaves is another name for the pages on which they were printed. So leaves of grass is something worthless. The first edition is published in Brooklyn at the printing shop of two Scottish immigrants whom Whitman had known for years, and the shop was located on Fulton Street, which is now an apartment building with a plaque on it bearing Whitman's name. Whitman paid for and did much of the typesetting for the first edition himself. A calculated feature of the first edition was that the book included neither the author nor the publisher's name, since both the author and the publisher were Whitman. Instead, the cover included an engraving by Samuel Hollier depicting Whitman himself in work clothes and a jaunty hat, arms at his side. This figure was meant to represent the devil-may-care American working man of the time, one who might be taken as an almost idealized figure in any crowd. The, the engraver later commented on his depiction, described the character with a rakish kind of slant, like the mast of a schooner. And the first edition contained no table of contents. None of the poems had any title. Early advertisements appealed to lovers of literary curiosities as an oddity. Sales of the book were few. Whitman was not discouraged. Whitman sent one paper-bound copy of the 1855 Leaves of Grass to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who had inspired its creation. Emerson responded with a letter of heartfelt thanks, writing, I find it the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom America has yet contributed. Emerson went on, I'm very happy in reading it, as a great power makes us happy. The letter was printed in the New York Tribune without Emerson's permission and caused an uproar among prominent New England men of letters, including Henry David Thoreau and Amos Brownson Walcott, were some of the few transcendentalists who agreed with Emerson's letter and his statements regarding Leaves of Grass. In other words, most of them didn't care for it. What did Emerson write? I'm not blind to the worth of the wonderful gift of Leaves of Grass. I find it the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. I'm very happy in reading it, as great power makes us happy. It meets the demand I am always making of what seemed the sterile and stingy nature, as if too much handiwork or too much lymph in the temperament were making our Western wits fat and mean. I give you joy of your free and brave thought. I have great joy in it, and I find incomparable things said incomparably well, as they must be. I find the courage of treatment which so delights us, and which large perception can inspire. And I greet you at the beginning of a great career, which yet must have had a long foreground somewhere for such a start. I rub my eyes a little to see if this sunbeam were no illusion, but the solid sense of the book is a sober certainty. It had the best merits, namely, of fortifying and encouraging. I did not know until I, last night, saw the book advertised in a newspaper that I could trust the name as real and available for a post office. I wish to see my benefactor and have felt much like striking my tasks and visiting New York to pay you my respects. So now we go after it was published. Emerson's positive response to the 1855 edition inspired Whitman to quickly produce a much expanded second edition in 1856. This new Leaves of Grass went from 95 pages to 384 pages and had a cover price of $1. It also included a phrase from Emerson's letter, printed in gold leaf. I greet you at the beginning of a great career. Recognized as a first for U.S. book publishing and marketing techniques, Whitman has been cited as inventing the use of the book blurb. Professor Laura Dassau-Walls noted, in one stroke, Whitman had given birth to the modern cover blurb, quite without Emerson's permission. Emerson later took offense that his letter was made public and became more critical of Whitman's works. The 1856 edition added Sundown poem, which was retitled Brooklyn, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, in the 1860 edition, and Poem of Procreation, retitled A Woman Waits for Me, in the 1867 edition. As the American Civil War was beginning, Whitman published his poem, Beat, Beat Drums, as a patriotic rally call for the Union. Whitman's brother, George, had joined the Union Army in the 51st New York Infantry Regiment and began sending Whitman several vividly detailed letters of the battlefront. On December 16th of 1862, a listing of fallen and wounded soldiers in the New York Tribune included First Lieutenant G.W. Whitmore, which Whitman worried was a reference to his brother George. So he made his way south immediately to find him, and his wallet was stolen on the way. Walking all day and night, unable to ride, trying to get information, trying to get access to big people, Whitman later wrote, he eventually found George alive, with only a superficial wound on his cheek. Whitman, profoundly affected by seeing the wounded soldiers and heaps of their amputated limbs, left for Washington, D.C. on December 28, 1862, with the intention of never returning to New York. In Washington, D.C., Whitman's friend, Charlie Eldridge, helped him obtain part-time work in the Army Paymaster's office, leaving time for Whitman to volunteer as a nurse in the Army hospitals. He'd write of this experience in The Great Army of the Sick, published in a New York newspaper in 1863, and 12 years later in a book called Memoranda During the War. Whitman then contacted Emerson, this time to ask for help in obtaining a government post. Another friend, John Trowbridge, passed on a letter of recommendation from Emerson to Salmon P. Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, hoping he would grant Whitman a position in that department. Chase, however, did not want to hire the author of such a disreputable book as Leaves of Grass. The Whitman family had a difficult end to 1864. On September 30th, 1864, Whitman's brother George was captured by Confederate forces in Virginia, and another brother, Andrew Jackson, died of tuberculosis compounded by alcoholism on December 3rd. That month, Whitman committed his brother Jesse to the Kings County Lunatic Asylum. Whitman's spirits were raised, however, when he finally got a better paying government post as a low-grade clerk in the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the Department of the Interior, thanks to a friend. And this friend, a poet and a daguerreotypist and an editor of the Saturday Evening Post, wrote to the Assistant Secretary of the Interior on Whitman's behalf, and Whitman began a new appointment on January 24th, 1865, with a yearly salary of $1,200. A month later, on February 24th, 1865, his brother George was released from capture, granted a furlough because of his poor health. By May 1st, Whitman had received a promotion to a slightly higher clerkship and published his poem Drum Taps. Effective June 30th, 1865, however, Whitman was fired from his job. His dismissal came from the new Secretary of the Interior, who dismissed several clerks who were seldom at their respective desks, but he may have fired Whitman on moral grounds after finding an 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass. O'Connor protested up the line, had Whitman transferred to the Attorney General's office on July 1st. O'Connor, though, was still upset and vindicated Whitman by publishing a biased and exaggerated biographical study, The Good Gray Poet, in January 1866. The 50-cent pamphlet defended Whitman as a wholesome patriot, established the poet's nickname, and increased his popularity. and aided in his popularity was the publication of "O Captain, My Captain," a conventional poem on the death of Abraham Lincoln, the only poem to appear in anthologies during Whitman's lifetime. Whitman was deeply influenced by deism. He denied any one faith was more important than another and embraced all religions equally. In Song of Myself, he gave an inventory of major religions, indicated he respected and accepted all of them, a sentiment he further emphasized in his poem With Antecedents, affirming, I adopt each theory, myth, god, and demigod. I see the old accounts, Bibles, genealogies are true without exception. In 1874, he was invited to write a poem about the spiritualism movement, to which he responded, It seems to me nearly altogether a poor, cheap, crude humbug. Whitman was a religious skeptic. Though he accepted all churches, he believed in none. God to Whitman was both immanent and transcendent, and the human soul was immortal and in a state of progressive development. American Philosophy and Encyclopedia classifies him as one of several figures who took a more pantheistic or pandeist approach by rejecting views of God as separate from the world. Whitman was the crucial celebrant of what I think we will yet call the American religion, the momentary fusion of all denominations, an amalgam of enthusiasm and Gnosticism. Our theologians and prophets of the American religion include Emerson, Joseph Smith, and Horace Bushnell, among others. The poet, philosopher William James is a psychologist. Walt Whitman forever will be its poet prophet, who sings only songs of myself. We now have an American Jesus, an American Holy Spirit, and have largely banished Yahweh, except that he marches as warrior God, endlessly trampling out the vintage where the rapes of Gath are stored. So here's a list of all the sections that are found in the later editions. You can see inscriptions, Children of Adam, Calamus, Birds of Passage, Sea Drift, By the Roadside, Drum Taps, Memories of President Lincoln, Autumn Rivulets, Whispers of Heavenly Death, From Noon to Starry Night, Songs of Parting, the first annex, Sands at 70, the second annex, Goodbye, My Fancy. The analysis of Leaves of Grass is complicated by Whitman's continual revisions to the book. Most scholarly discussions have concentrated on the major early editions of 1856 and 1860, along with the collections published in 1881 and 1892. The latter editions of Leaves of Grass would include such well-known poems as Pioneers, O Pioneers, A Noiseless Patient Spider, and the poet's elegies to Abraham Lincoln, O Captain, My Captain, and When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed. While Whitman famously proclaimed in Song of Myself his poetry was nature without check, with original energy, literary scholars have discovered that Whitman borrowed from a number of sources for Leaves of Grass. For example, in his war poems collected in Drum Taps, he lifted phrases from popular newspapers dealing with Civil War battles. He also condensed a chapter from a popular science book into his poem, The World Below the Brine. Particularly in Song of Myself, Whitman emphasizes an all-powerful I who serves as the narrator. The I attempts to relieve both social and private problems by using powerful affirmative cultural images. The emphasis on American culture in particular helped reach Whitman's intention of creating a distinctly American epic poem compared to the works of Homer. As a believer in phrenology, Whitman in the 1855 preface to Leaves of Grass includes the phrenologist among those described as the lawgiver of poets. Borrowing from the discipline, Whitman uses the phrenological concept of adhesiveness in reference to one's propensity for friendship and camaraderie. When Leaves of Grass was first published, Whitman was fired from his job at the Department of Interior after Secretary of the Interior read it and said he found it offensive. An early review of the 1855 edition focused on the persona of the anonymous poet, calling him a loafer with a certain air of mild defiance and an expression of pensive insolence on his face. Another reviewer labeled the work an odd attempt at reviving old transcendental thoughts, the speculations of that school of thought which culminated at Boston 15 or 18 years ago. Emerson approved of the collection in part because he considered it a means of reviving transcendentalism, though even he urged Whitman to tone down the sexual imagery. Poet John Greenleaf Whittier was said to have thrown his 1855 edition into the fire. Thomas Wentworth Higginson wrote, "It's no discredit to Walt Whitman that he wrote Leaves of Grass, only that he did not burn it afterwards." The Saturday Press printed a thrashing review that advised its author to commit suicide. Critic Rufus Millo Griswold reviewed Leaves of Grass in November of 1855 issue of the Criterion and called it a mass of stupid filth and characterized its author as a filthy free lover. And Griswold also suggested in Latin that Whitman was guilty of that horrible sin not to be mentioned among Christians, one of the earliest public accusations of Whitman being a homosexual. Griswold's intensely negative review almost caused the publication of the second edition to be suspended, but Whitman incorporated the full review, including the innuendo, in a later edition of Leaves of Grass. Not all responses were negative. Critic William Rossetti considered Leaves of Grass a classic, along the lines of the works of William Shakespeare and Dante Alighieri. A Connecticut woman, Susan Smith, wrote to Whitman to profess her love for him after reading Leaves of Grass and even offered him her womb should he want a child. Although he found much of the language reckless and indecent, the critic and author George Ripley believed isolated portions of Leaves of Grass radiated vigor and quaint beauty. Whitman firmly believed he'd be accepted and embraced by the populace, especially the working class. Years later, he regretted not having toured the country to deliver his poetry directly by lecturing. He said, "If I'd gone directly to the people, read my poem, faced the crowds, got into the immediate touch with Tom, Dick, and Harry, instead of waiting to be interpreted, I would have had my audience at once." On March 1st of 1882, the Boston District Attorney Oliver Stevens wrote to Whitman's publisher that Leaves of Grass constituted obscene literature. Urged by the New England Society for the Suppression of Vice, his letter said in part, "We're of the opinion that this book is such a book as it brings within it the provisions of public statutes respecting obscene literature and suggests the propriety of withdrawing the same from circulation and suppressing the editions thereof." Stevens demanded the removal of the poem "A Woman Waits for Me" to, to "A Common Prostitute," as well as changes to "Song of Myself," "From Pent-Up Aching Rivers," "I Sing the Body Electric," "Spontaneous Me," "Native Moments," "The Dalliance of the Eagles," "By Blue Ontario Shore," "Unfolded Out of the Folds," "The Sleepers," and "Faces." Whitman rejected the censorship, writing back, "The list whole and several is rejected by me and will not be thought of under any circumstances." Osgood refused to republish the book and returned the printing plates to Whitman when his suggested changes and deletions were ignored. Whitman then found a different publisher that released a new edition in 1882. Whitman believed the controversy would increase sales, which indeed proved true. Its banning in Boston, for example, became a major scandal, generated much publicity for Whitman and his work, although it was also banned by retailers like Wanamaker's in Philadelphia. This version went through 5 editions, 1,000 copies each. Its first printing, released on July 18th, sold out in one day. So what is his legacy? Its status of Leaves of Grass as one of the most important collections of American poetry has meant that over time, various groups and movements have used Leaves of Grass and Whitman's work in general to advance their own political and social purposes. This is the tried and true adage that first they ignore it, then they attack you, and then they claim that they did it first. In the first half of the 20th century, the popular Little Blue Book series introduced Whitman's work to a wider audience than ever before. A series that backed socialist and progressive viewpoints, the publication connected the poet's focus on the common man to the empowerment of the working class. During World War II, the U.S. government distributed for free much of Whitman's poetry to their soldiers in the belief that his celebrations of the American way would inspire people tasked with protecting the American way. Whitman's work has been claimed in the name of racial equality. In a preface to the 1946 anthology, I Hear the People Singing, selected poems of Walt Whitman, Langston Hughes wrote Whitman's all-embracing words lock arms with workers and farmers, Negroes and whites, Asiatics and Europeans, serfs and freemen, beaming democracy to all. Similarly, a 1970 volume of Whitman's poetry, published by the United States Information Agency, describes Whitman as a man who will mix indiscriminately with the people. The volume, which was presented for an international audience, attempted to present Whitman as representative of an America that accepts people of all groups. Nevertheless, Whitman has been criticized for the nationalism expressed in Leaves of Grass and other works. In a 2009 essay regarding Whitman's nationalism in the first edition, Nathaniel O'Reilly claims that Whitman imagined America as arrogant, expansionist, hierarchical, racist, and exclusive. Such an America is unacceptable to Native Americans, African Americans, immigrants, the disabled, the infertile, and all those who value equal rights. So we close here with "O Captain, My Captain," which Whitman closed many of his public speeches with. Again, Walt Whitman wrote "O Captain, My Captain" to mourn the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln and to commemorate the end of the Civil War. The poem uses the metaphor of a ship arriving in port after a long voyage to represent the nation's victory and the end of the war, while the death of the captain symbolizes Lincoln's tragic death at that crucial moment. The poem captures the bittersweet mix of national triumph and profound grief, a feeling Whitman experienced firsthand after Lincoln's death, which occurred while he was in New York City. To mourn Abraham Lincoln, that's the first thing to keep in mind. The poem is an elegy or a poem of mourning for Abraham Lincoln. Whitman viewed Lincoln as a father figure who guided the nation through the Civil War. To capture contradictory emotions, the poem expresses the complex feelings of a nation that had just won a long and painful war, but had lost its leader. Whitman captures a celebration of victory alongside the devastation of Lincoln's death. To speak to a broad audience, Whitman used a more traditional rhyming style with a regular rhythm to make the poem accessible to a wider audience. This was a departure from his usual free verse and allowed the public to more easily connect with and understand the grief of the nation's loss. And then as a performance piece, Whitman frequently recited "O Captain, My Captain" at the end of his public lectures about the assassination of Lincoln, solidifying its role as a public expression of national grief and tribute. So here we go. Here's the poem. "O Captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship is weathered, every wrack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes a steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. O captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbons wreaths, for you the shores are crowding, for you they call the swaying mask, their eager faces turning. Dear captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in and with object one, exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. And there you have it. Thank you for all that you do, and we will see you next week.